Excellent. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Jomo Stewart and Jim Dotson here at FEDC. It is Tuesday, I believe, August 4th. With us today, we have Mr. Kirk Warren with AEA. We were fortunate enough to have the Executive Director of AEA as our guest last week. He gave us a very good overview of the goings and doings of AEA. Now we're going to go ahead and bore in on a specific subject, which is Railbelt reliability and coordination between the utilities to try to boost efficiency, lower costs, and regularize the system, or perhaps de-balkanize our electric system a bit. So Mr. Kirk Warren has been with the authority since 2011, and as Director of Engineering and Energy Development is responsible for managerial oversight of AEA's owned assets and advises AEA's Executive Director and Board on energy policy and planning initiatives related to the Railbelt region. Prior to his work at the authority, Mr. Warren served as engineering manager at Star Natural Gas Company for 5 years. He also has 12 years of state service at the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. He received his Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Alaska, Anchorage. I have to explain all the Michigan paraphernalia, sir. Served as a professional engineer in the state since 2003. And Mr. Warren has served 4 years in the U.S. Army as an airborne ranger. So, Mr. Warren, if you would, the floor is yours.
Well, Jomo, the Michigan reference, anybody born in the Midwest understands that, there's really nothing I can do about it. I'm just born with it. So, Jim, Jomo, thanks for the opportunity to speak. Sorry, I don't have a presentation for you. And for those that were at the chamber couple weeks ago, you probably heard most of this. I won't bore you with a lot of the details that Mr. Thayer went over with respect to the overarching mission of the Alaska Energy Authority, but I will quickly just go over our corporate policy. We are created in 1976 by the Alaska Legislature. We're a public corporation, the state governed by our board of directors. Our mission is to reduce the cost of energy in Alaska. AEA is the state's energy office, with the lead agency for statewide energy policy and program development. We do a host of things. As Jomo mentioned, we own assets, the Alaska Intertie, which connects Fairbanks with natural gas fire generation in South Central Alaska. We administer the Power Cost Equalization Program, provide rural assistance through training, circuit rider support, administration of the Rural Power Systems Upgrade Program and bulk fuel utility programs. We have energy technology programs such as biomass, hydro, wind, solar. We have subject matter experts in those fields. We administer grants and loans. Many of you are familiar with the Renewable Energy Grant Program, the Power Project Loan Fund, and we do energy planning. So with that, kind of getting right into the Railbelt Reliability Council and kind of what happened to date to get us to where we are and where we are today. Big picture developments. In 2010, the state of Alaska, in cooperation with the Railbelt utilities, completed what was called the Railbelt Integrated Resource Plan. That plan identified a host of issues in the Railbelt that should be accomplished. One of them was transmission decongestion. Based on that, AEA took on the mantle of creating a transmission plan in 2014, or contracting for administration of a transmission plan in 2014, which was completed in 2017. During development of that transmission plan, the RCA became very interested in the cost benefits that were ascribed to the transmission plan that AEA had undergone. And they contracted to analyze what benefits were there and if institutional reform in the Railbelt was necessary in order to achieve those savings if they could be identified. So in 2015, the RCA completed that, the administration of that contract, and basically had 5 recommendations that they had submitted to the legislature. I'll just go in order here. They said a transmission company should be created. It should be independent. They encouraged system-wide merit order economic dispatch. They wanted to allow time for the utilities to form this organization on a voluntary basis. They wanted the utilities to agree upon universal reliability standards within the Railbelt region of the state. And lastly, which is kind of often overlooked, is RCA is paid for through what's called the regulatory cost charge. They wanted to increase that cost charge in order to administer this new entity, this transco, so to speak. Many of you are aware Transco, American Transmission Company, in 2019 did file for a CPCN to become a transmission company, and that that filing was rejected by the RCA. What the utility has done since 2015 is continue on with the voluntary efforts to form an organization to see if they could capture the savings that were identified in the plan. A lot of large efforts were undertaken. Voluntary pooling efforts in the Anchorage area between MEA, CEA, and MLMP were undertaken. They formed what was called the Reliability Council. Railbelt Reliability Council, we'll talk about that in more detail in just a little bit. Railbelt Reliability Council was formed by an organizational development team, which was a representative from 3 of the 6 railbelt utilities that kind of put together what a stakeholder group would look like, started the basis of a memorandum of understanding whereby all 6 utilities could get on board with an entity that was going to take care of the tasks, which we'll mention in just a little bit. And the organizational development team identified what they called an implementation committee, similar to what happened in the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT, which is the independent system operator in Texas. They formed what was called an implementation committee. It's a stakeholder group. It contained all 6 railbelt utilities, and we'll go into detail in just a little bit. Also in the midst of all of this, the voluntary pooling efforts, we had the potential acquisition of Municipal Light and Power, a municipal entity, by Chugach Electric, a co-op here in South Central Alaska. That is ongoing. Many of you are probably following that at the RCA as we speak. So what does the Memorandum of Understanding say that the railbelt utilities agreed to? Basically, it's the guidelines by which the railbelt utilities agreed to participate in this entity. It says that they will adopt, administer, and enforce reliability standards. It says they will develop, adopt, and administer the rules for open access and interconnection protocols. It will develop, adopt, and utilize system-wide planning process for the entire interconnected bulk power system. And they will perform a cost-benefit study under the guidance of the Technical Advisory Committee in order to identify the merits of system-ordered economic dispatch, which we talked about earlier. While the voluntary efforts were continuing with the railbelt utilities and they were entering into this memorandum of understanding amongst themselves at the same time, the Senate, excuse me, somebody have a question?
Yes, this is Jomo. There's a phrase you keep using. I wonder if you might define it. Merit-based economic dispatch?
Merit order economic dispatch. I see the participant list. I'm sure there's some here that can probably speak better than me to it. However, when people think of economic dispatch, what they see is the lowest heat rate unit basically is the first one that's going to deliver a kilowatt of power. So the lowest cost power is going to be generated first. That's economic dispatch. Security constrained merit order economic dispatch. What that says, it kind of honors existing agreements that are in place and also understands the transient and power flow systems of the transmission system. So if you fully built it, and this was identified during the transmission upgrade study that I talked about that AEA engaged in, there are a lot of ways to skin the cat to get the lowest cost kilowatt hour to be produced. But if it costs you more to make sure that that can be delivered whenever you need it, than it would if you used the second most expensive kilowatt, then you're really not gaining anything. So it honors existing commitments and also understands that the system may go unstable if you try to use that one particular generating source to generate all the power it possibly has before you move to the second highest, the second most lowest value kilowatt hour that can be produced. That's the simplest way that I can describe it. If there's somebody online that can describe it better, I am happy to hear that.
Okay, this one I don't see anyone raising hands. We do have one request. As we move through, just to begin, if you could just express acronyms, AEA is Energy Authority, RCA, Regulatory Commission of Alaska, just so people who might be watching this after the fact can have those definitions as we go.
I'd be happy to do that. And I'll just tell you that I have friends that have kids that golf, and they just got out of a tournament called the AJGA acronym Invitational. So just share that. So I understand, and I'll do my best.
Thanks.
So along with the RRC efforts, Railbelt Reliability Council efforts that were undertaken by the Railbelt utilities on a voluntary basis, continue with that, the Senate and the House were looking at passing legislation to create an organization called Electric Reliability Organization, ERO. Those efforts were successful in the last legislative session and manifested themselves in the form of Senate Bill 123. What Senate Bill 123 says is that the commission shall form an commission, being the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, the RCA, shall form an electric reliability organization if an entity does not apply for certification by October 1st of 2021. It also, currently, they're promulgating regulations regarding how this entity is to be formed, what kind of board it'll have, what its bylaws will look like, what its governance structure will look like, and what duties it will be assigned. The functionalities of the Electric Reliability Organization, the ERO, they are to file reliability standards to address cybersecurity issues, facility security issues, and additions or modifications to the bulk power system. They will complete integrated resource planning, and they're required to get project pre-approval from the RCA. So with that, the Railbelt utilities, under the auspices of the Memorandum of Understanding that are in place and all 6 utilities have signed, are moving forward with the creation of a Railbelt Reliability Council, which they envision will be the applicant to become the Electric Reliability Organization no later than October 1st, 2021. And with that, Jomo, I'll take any questions that people have.
Okay. Wow. All right. Well, we do have one in the chat box. Will the constraints of COVID response impact the ability of the legislature and the utilities to move ahead with coherent, electric utility consolidation and regulatory alignment? Do we expect any timeline impact from COVID at this juncture?
Thank you for that question. I'm not sure who asked it. I do not see a way that it is not going to affect the timeline. If anybody has business in front of the RCA right now, they understand it's similar to this meeting. Everything is being held electronically. It's a lot more difficult. Things have been delayed. I can tell you that the utilities and the implementation committee, which is now fully sat for the Railbelt Reliability Council, are doing everything in their power to ensure they stay on timeline and they're able to meet that October 1st, 2021 deadline.
We have a follow-up question from Mr. Terrio. What is AEA's position on the need for the ERO to be independent?
We think it's vital. Thank you, Gene, and nice to hear your name. Both balanced and independent. I think a lot of the struggle in the bylaws of the Railbelt Reliability Council are going to be seen in these first few meetings with respect to what does independence mean. It is going to be a very difficult row to hoe here to have complete independence. If you had a board sat that did not understand any of the intricacies of the Railbelt system, I don't know how successful that board would be. That does not mean that it needs to be filled up with 12 engineers. So we've done what we can to ensure that our definition of balance and our definition of stakeholder and our definition of independence is incorporated through the process by which we elect officers to the implementation committee of this organization, so that there's a diverse set of stakeholders that have input into the development of these bylaws and the articles of incorporations and all the documents that are going to go into forming this ERO. And it's, in essence, it's mandated by the bill itself. If you read Senate Bill 123, it says that the board shall be balanced and independent. So it is not promulgated through regulation, it's a statute. It needs to be independent. And we will be working with the RCA as tensions kind of mount and then de-stress and mount and de-stress on what the definition of independent is.
John Davis. I see. And just one more on that subject. So again, we're looking at this sheet, the FAQ, and it talks about, again, the implementation committee. So again, there'll be a committee to help set this up, and then it'll essentially have an independent board that oversees it.
That is accurate. It envisions that this implementation committee really will be the first board of directors once the articles of incorporation and bylaws are written.
Okay. All right. Coming in. Please go ahead, Hawkins.
Thank you, Jomo. Hopefully you can hear me. So that board of directors for the RRC, I understand, had been taking applications throughout the spring and had closed down. Do you know what the structure of that looks like right now? I know that there were stakeholder entities, the utilities, an at-large public seat, I believe, renewable energy advocates, things like that. Do you know who ended up on that board off the top of your head? And then, yeah, I've got a quick follow-up on that after you're done.
Yes, sir, I do. So all 12 members have been sat at this time. The 6 railbelt utilities all hold a seat. AEA holds a seat. The RCA and the Regulatory Affairs and Public Advocacy, RAPA, both of them hold an ex officio seat, non-voting seat on the board. There are 2 independent power producers. One of them is Siri, and the other is Joel Groves, representing AIPPA. There's a consumer advocacy seat, which ACPERG was the only applicant, and they have been sat. And there are 2 non-affiliated seats that applied. The MOU created what was called a selection committee. It consisted of the consumer advocacy seat, 1 independent power producer, and AEA to form the criteria by which the non-affiliated seats would be sat. That was about a month-and-a-half process, and that culminated about 3 weeks ago. And we've sat Chris Rose with the Renewable Energy Alaska Project, REAP, and Jerry West with the Northwest Power Pool Association. They both, through the evaluating committee, ended up being the SAT candidates.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. I had heard a lot of those names. It was good to hear the last few that I was not aware of. This certainly was a heck of an effort between the Senate Railbelt Electric Issues Committee and the House Special Committee on Energy moving this through. And the RCA is just wrapping up their first of 3 dockets on this that deals with the structure of how they'll put forward the ERO that the RRC will be applying for, the ERO being the Electric Liability Operative. And hopefully this RRC will apply in October. We are having a committee hearing this Friday morning at 9 a.m. with the House Special Committee on Energy for an update from the RCA, and then also to hear from ACEP, the Alaska Center for Energy and Power, and then finally a national and international group called the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP, where we'll hear from several international experts about best practices and needs for the ERO and what integrated resource planning might look like going forward in something of a new world, since the last time we did, the state did that integrated resource plan that Mr. Warren talked about. So that could be an interesting hearing if people want to chime into or listen into that on Friday. It'll be 9 a.m. again on Friday, and we'll send Jomo the information as well.
Actually, thank you, Rep. Hopkins. That covers two of the bases. First, yeah, I was going to announce that, let everyone know. Again, Friday, August 7th, 9 a.m., the House Energy Committee will be getting information on this specific subject. And we did have a question about what experience with ERO implementations would we be, bringing into Alaska to help us with best practices and avoidance of pitfalls. And so again, that the group, the Regulatory Assistance Project, will be part of that meeting. We do have a further question, Mr. Warren, if we could. What role does AEA envision for itself in participation and coordination with the RRC? Are you another one of the ex officios?
We are not one of the ex officios. We do own generation, as I mentioned earlier, we own generation assets, we own transmission assets, and yet we do not hold a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, a CPCN. So we are uniquely different, and we've been characterized as a utility. I think it's a false premise that we are a utility. We have a different mission. We do not, we have no fiduciary responsibility to sell power. Our mission is to reduce the cost of energy in Alaska. If you look through the last docket at the RCA and some of the responses to the questions in the technical committee that was created at the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, they are wrestling with balanced stakeholder independent boards. Should they be sector driven? Should each sector have a minimum number of representations? So they are looking at models. And as Representative Hopkins pointed out, I think the RAP advocates can help us tremendously with respect to how these have formed in the lower 48. So although the MOU outlines and envisions a board of directors that is 12 members exactly as we identified, the RCA is promulgating regulations right now, and it is very possible that that structure looks different at that time. AEA right now, if you look at the stakeholder list and the sector representations, we would be a government instrumentality.
John's question, you keep jumping over.
Oh, we do have a question from John Davies, and then if we could circle back around to the RCA. So you did mention modeling. Have any studies shown savings from these actions?
I think that's one of the first orders of business for the ERO will be to look at the structure of the costs of the organization to be stood up and run on an annual basis. What are the capital and operating costs? And then I can tell you, Jomo, through a history here with the Alaska Energy Authority, that there are a host of studies that show savings. It's just a matter of bringing it all together so that there is an entity that is a voice to make sure that those savings can be realized.
And shared as equitably as possible across system.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if you don't mind, Kirk, I'm not sure if you see it on your screen, but I'm actually at the RCA's website. If someone was going to try to track this, what would we be putting in? How would we find this matter or these matters? Do you know your head?
I know one of them off the top of my head, and as Representative Hopkins said, they've now formed 3 dockets, mostly for because it's such a complex topic. They broke it up into 3 dockets. I do know the original docket, which will get you to all 3, is R20-001. I'll try to pull it up with you, Jomo, so I can track along in case you have any questions.
I don't think there's a dash in front of R.
Oh, yep, here it is. Parties.
And I'd like to thank Representative Hopkins for mentioning the Friday. Jomo had mentioned this. Yesterday was my first day back. I was out with the pneumonia for a week and a half. So that's why I have no presentation or anything like that. So.
Well, certainly, Mr. Warren, and pneumonia is good news these days. So I'm glad to hear you're on the mend.
I can tell you I was very happy to get that diagnosis.
Yeah, it's strange times when pneumonia is the win.
Yeah.
All right, well, everyone, if you can see it again, if you'd like to track the matter, it's R-20-001. And thank you, Mr. Warren. I'll be checking this out now too. Okay. All right, well, right now, we don't have any further questions. This has gone way too fast. Any further questions here in the chat box? And so I will just go ahead and open it up to the guests online. Feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself if you have any questions.
Or comments.
Or comments. Anything from you, sir?
Oh, you're doing an excellent job, Joe.
Jeez.
Yeah, this is Gary. You know, as long as we have Kirk on, I wonder if he might talk about the challenges with the transmission grid that was affected with the Swan Lake fire and what the outcome is. It sounds like AEA really stepped up. That's the Quartz Creek transmission.
Certainly, Mr. Newman. So those that are not aware, the Swan Lake fire this summer caused an outage to the one transmission line that served power from AEA's Bradley Lake facility to every utility north of Homer Electric Association. That line is currently under, I think, two different, it's being litigated in two different courts at this point. The northern utilities ascribed a cost of around $13 million in not savings, but in costs that they incurred due to not having access to the 4.5 cent power from the Bradley Lake facility. So there were about 13 miles of poles that were damaged. HEA and the northern utilities worked very closely together to try to get that line restored as quickly as possible, but it became evident that ownership alignment on that line was going to continue to create tensions throughout the Railbelt. And we thought it better, and HEA agreed, so did the other 5 utilities north of the fire, that if we could align ownership with that line so that it's more in a traditional utility cost causer, cost payer type methodology with respect to fixing the line, should events happen in the future, that it would be better for the collective system. So under the auspices of that, AEA entered into a letter of intent with Homer Electric Association on terms by which the state would participate in owning that line and be operated similar to the Alaska Intertie by the utilities that collectively get the benefits from that line being there. So I hope that answers your question, Gary.
Okay. I do have questions in some level. Well, we do have a question from the group regarding the Susitna Dam. How does that play into this, or considerations for the Susitna Dam, or is it a consideration?
It has not been a consideration of either the Railbelt Reliability Council. I would imagine that the Electric Reliability Organization, if you think back to when I had said one of the things that the ARO must do is get project pre-approval from the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. So under those auspices, if any entity, whether it be an independent power producer, whether it be a state entity, if you are going to connect into the bulk power system, you're going to need to go through a robust planning process to ensure that it meets the criteria by which an entity would add generation onto the system. So obviously AEA of the state of Alaska has spent a lot of money on licensing Susitna-Watana since it was put in abeyance. And even with the removal of the administrative orders, which allowed us to restart work on that project, we have not spent any money looking at updating the studies that have been done to date. We do know that with the timing, the amount of time it takes to get this to license, it will definitely fall within the purview of the ERO to be involved in some manner, and we do not want to get ahead of that.
Okay. right, not seeing any hands go up. I do have a concern. Again, of course, we live here in Fairbanks. We're effectively at the end of the shoestring that moves power up and down the rail belt. I do wonder, is this going to be robust and empowered enough, again, to make sure that we have enough transmission to really fully capitalize on what's in the offing? And how would that be secured?
So thank you, Jim. This is just my opinion, obviously. I can't fully, you might get 10 different answers from 10 different people. I think it's the best shot we've got. It was a Herculean effort, as Representative Hopkins mentioned, for the House and the Senate to pass SB 123 and the 6 Railbelt utilities. For those that have been here for a while, all 6 boards signed a memorandum of understanding giving up power. That really is a historic moment in the rail belt. It has not happened before. I think we're closer than we've ever been to be able to realize the savings that you just mentioned. You will not be the end of the system. You will be just part of the system at that point.
It's always nice to receive that assurance.
Yeah, understood.
Okay, looks like we do have another question that's popped up. In April, AEA sent a list of shovel-ready energy infrastructure projects to Governor Dunleavy's Economic Stabilization Team. What are the prospects of those projects being funded? If any are funded, what role would an ERO play in implementing them?
So we have not heard back yet. I don't know who asked that question, but we have not heard back yet on the probability of the economic stimulus monies coming to AEA. We tried to prioritize the projects as best we could. There are a lot of mechanisms depending on how that money is deployed. Many of you are familiar with the Renewable Energy Fund. It's possible that some of that money could be used to capitalize the Renewable Energy Fund if it's for renewable energy projects. What's government's role? If this ends up being a $2 billion, a $3 billion infrastructure package and AEA gets a hefty package of that, there may be a way to incentivize capitalizing a fund whereby projects are vetted and come out, and the ERO is one of the vettors of those projects as they come out. So there's not a lot of meat on those bones yet, Jomo, but we've given a lot of thought as to how the funds could be deployed should they come to Alaska.
Hey, Ben Boudinger was the one who asked the question. Ben, you have a follow-up? You can just go ahead and take yourself off mute.
I don't, thank you.
Okay.
I hope that answered your question, Ben.
Kirk, this is John Davies. Back to the Swan Lake fire issue. What are the main issues that are at litigation in the court cases?
So I'm going to preface this with, I'm not a lawyer. I don't even pretend to play one. One of the issues is the attribution of the costs to HEA to their entire system by nature of power flowing over that line. So there's a western loop on the Kenai Peninsula and there's an eastern loop on the Kenai Peninsula. Historically, the eastern loop has kind of been what people have seen as the transmitter of Bradley Lake power. What Homer contends is that through the way Bradley is dispatched, it has a greater effect to them being HEA, Homer Electric Association, and the entirety of their system and their generating units, which happen to be running at unsweet spots at times of the day that normally they would be running in the sweet spot, were it not for the way that the power from Bradley were dispatched. So in essence, it comes down to HEA believing they're not being reimbursed for the true costs that are incurred to them by maintaining that line.
Follow up, Mr. Davies?
No, thank you. That explains it.
Ooh, we're starting to get questions here in the chat box. There was a question or a statement, question statement from Mr. Terrio back to Susitna Dam, and that was just the fact that the kind of upgrades to Railbelt transmission likely to be envisioned by and implemented by the ERO would likely facilitate in future the flow of power from, say, a Susitna. Certainly would help.
Yeah, that's an observant point by Mr. Terrio. That is true. If you think back to, and Mr. Terrio was with the authority when we were completing the transmission plan, but we purposely broke that transmission plan into two segments. One was kind of, what would a transmission system look like if nobody had ever heard the word Susitna-Wautanah? And it created a host of projects that cost X amount of money, and we ascribed a certain amount of benefits to them. We did a post-analysis that said, what would the system look like if Susitna-Wautanah were built? And it did generate a few additional projects. One of them, I think, was a battery energy storage system in the Anchorage area, and a larger upgrade to one of the South Central lines than would have happened would Susitna not be built. So we did that on purpose. It's a misnomer, though, and it's hard to get ahead of it. If the bulk power system and transmission planning is done in accordance with what I'll call transmission planning standards, TPL 001, 004, which is what the lower 48 uses in the FERC and the NERC world, it would result in a transmission system that looks exactly like the transmission plan that AEA completed in 2017. There is no doubt that those would be needed for Susitna-Wautanah to be able to transmit power north and south up the bulk power system. That does not mean they were done because of Susitna-Wautanah.
Okay. We do have a question. Let's see. Will the new organization take over all the gas and fuel contracts so they can generate the most cost-effective generation? Or does it not reach that far down into the utilities themselves?
I think that's yet to be seen, but I think thinking ahead, it's highly unlikely. You're still going to have 6 independent boards of directors who are able to enter into gas contracts with the downstream supplier.
Or rather, fuel contracts.
Better said.
Okay. Well, that actually brought me back around. You mentioned battery storage, or the potential for large-scale battery storage. Is that another thing that, again, would be in the hands of the utilities, but it's a major investment, not like generation, though. You've spoken specifically of this ERO having some level of oversight over decision-making for generation investments. Would batteries fall under that same umbrella?
They would, Jomo. Yeah, and I misspoke if I said just generation. I did not intend to mean that.
No, you didn't. You didn't. It just was the specific example used. Okay. So there's a host of structural investments, physical infrastructure investments over which this will have some level of oversight and input.
If it's not distribution, then the answer is yes. And the legislation actually defines what a large capital project is. So, and I don't have that off the top of my head, but absolutely, if it affects the bulk electric power system, anything that is not distribution, and it is a large project, it will need RCA pre-approval.
I believe, this is Rep. Hopkins, I believe the law definition is any project that is over 15 megawatts of generation, I believe, and any power line that is over, I want to say 10 miles long, and also any underwater power line that is, now I can't remember the certain length of that, 1 mile or 3 miles long, I believe, for underwater, are what is required for pre-approval from the RCA, and my staff, Joe Hardenbrook, can correct me on that if I'm wrong.
Thank you, Representative Hopkins.
And all this was defined in the original statute?
Yes, sir.
Defined in Senate Bill 123.
Okay. For everyone who's watching, you can see that I have pulled up Senate Bill 123. You can find it on the legislature's website. If you just Google Alaska Legislature, and in the search field at near the top of the page, type in SB 123, and you can see the bill. You can also go back and listen to read the minutes or listen to the audio or watch videos of the hearings themselves if you'd like to do a deeper dive into the background of the bill and the structure that the legislature has helped create. This one might actually be for you, Gary, because I believe you're the one who mentioned Swan Lake Fire. We have a question. Do you know the case number for the litigation related to the Swan Lake Fire transmission line damage?
You know, I don't offhand. I think the issue was not so much the Swan Lake fire, but it was a couple of prior litigation issues over whether Bradley Lake agreement was in effect for issues related to the Western Loop that Kirk talked about. And that went all the way to the Supreme Court and got mandated back down to Superior Court with some. And I think that the agreement that's being worked on is, and I'm not sure if they've signed a memorandum of understanding, yet on this, but that's going to resolve all those legal issues. So I thank AEA for stepping in and being willing to take some ownership of that Swan Lake transmission thing. There's a lot of history there, and I could probably occupy a couple of hours on talking about that, but I don't think anybody's got the tenacity for that.
And for everyone online, our intrepid task force member, Gary Newman, is also a board member on GVEA's board. So just for the good of the order, I do have a comment specifying that pages 15 and 16 of SB 23 detail the specific parameters of energy projects requiring pre-approval by the RCA. And so I'm actually scrolling it right now on the screen. But again, if you'd like to pull the bill, you may, and 15 and 16, pages 15 and 16 would include that information, what requires pre-approval by the RCA. All right, we have an open mic. If anyone has any questions or would like to chime in with comments, please feel free.
Hey, Jomo, this is Lou Florence. Sorry, did I just step on somebody?
No, you did not, sir. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. So for those of you I have not met yet, I'm Lou Florence, and I am the newish president of Doyon Utilities. Doyon Utilities has a CPCN certificate for electrical distribution, also generation, and we are connected to the bulk electrical system here in Fairbanks and down in Delta, although we're not on the Railbelt Reliability Council. But I just wanted to mention my own experience. So I have gone through the establishment of these rules, these cybersecurity reliability rules, in 2 different jurisdictions previously. So I was involved in the development of the WEC rules down in the Western, when it was the Western Electric Coordinating Council, and I also went through the development and implementation of these rules up in the Alberta electrical system. So it was referred to a little earlier, but I just wanted to point out that this is so the work that's been done to date is tremendous. I've only been in Alaska since last September, but to see the work that the Railbelt utilities have done and the agreement they've come to without state legislation was tremendous. And now that we have this enabling legislation and the authority given to the RCA, it's clear that we're going to get the electric reliability organization we need that will confer all the benefits that have been discussed. And I think Kirk did a good job of laying those out. But I just wanted to point out that there's a long road ahead, and this becomes a very large and cumbersome regulatory scheme that has to be administered and maintained. There are costs associated with it, and it's pretty complex for all the utilities involved and for anybody who's connected to the bulk electrical system, whether they're IPPs or some other entity. So there's quite a bit to this, and even after we get the ERO stood up, there'll be quite a bit more to do.
I think that's well said, Lou. This is Kirk. It's nice to meet you, and I look forward to working with you in a whole host of venues. So,
nice to meet you too. Thanks.
That's a good reminder. Again, it sounds very well. Can sometimes sound pretty simple and direct, but it is a complex project. Do we feel like there's plenty of time or enough time, Kirk, to work through those by deadline?
It's going to take a heavy push. I believe there is. As Lou indicated, the work has just begun. The real work is ensuring you get the articles of incorporation, the bylaws stood up. There's going to be a lot of back and forth with the RCA. In my opinion, the Railbelt Reliability Council at this point, it's a memorandum of agreement right now. It's a structure basically with one foundational document, which is a memorandum of understanding, which is only signed by the 6 Railbelt utilities. Everybody else is kind of following along, saying, okay, we think this is a good structure, this will work. The RRC is going to have to be nimble. Everybody can envision a situation where the regulations come out and the board does not look anything like what is in that MOU. Utilities are not known for being nimble. I mean, they're capital intensive industries that, they take large decisions. They don't take large decisions lightly. So to get all 6 utility boards back in alignment with a structure that doesn't look like what they agreed to, perhaps. So you can see a lot of tensions that would be created. I am hopeful that everybody knows the importance of this and that we can get it across the finish line in time.
Certainly the threat of a simple RCA imposition adds impetus.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, at this moment, I have no further questions in the chat box. So if anyone would like to chime in, take yourselves off mute. We'll go ahead and give you a moment for that. Anything from you, Mr. Dotson?
No, Jomo, I think you've done an excellent job. Kirk, thank you for participating. And Kirk, we hope you continue to recover. I'm glad you didn't have COVID and simply had pneumonia. So good to hear from you again.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for the invitation. It's nice to talk to people in Fairbanks again. I miss you guys.
Same here. If you'll please buy a UAA ball cap, I can post your picture with your notice.
Wouldn't you make it be UAF?
We prefer that, obviously, but go UA. We're statewide supporters.
All right.
Oh, all right. We won't flog this for an extra 10 minutes.
Okay.
Although I really enjoy these meetings. I really do, guys. Thank you so much. And again, Kirk, thank you so much. AEA, you've been our presenter now for 2 weeks, and they've just been excellent. So much appreciated. Oh, yes, sir. Just as a reminder, again, Friday at 9 a.m., if you go to the Alaska Legislature website, the House Energy Committee will be having a briefing on the Railbelt Reliability Organization, or the ERO, SB 123. Okay, with lots of participants. And again, you can check that out online. Again, just Google Alaska Legislature and it'll come right up. For next week, we do have on schedule, I need to confirm again, just to make sure his busy schedule hasn't refilled on us, but we have Mike Sfraga. So Mike Sfraga will be our guest next week. The state of the Arctic, Alaska, in the global geopolitics, global geostrategic politics. So that's great. And without further ado, I believe that's all for today. So everybody have a great week. And we'll see you next Tuesday. If we don't see you online on Friday for the House Energy hearing.
Thanks, Jomo. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, sir. All right. Have a good week, everybody.